report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Thailand launches airstrikes on Cambodian positions after a Thai soldier is killed, with Cambodia reporting 4 civilians dead and thousands fleeing the border areas. Both sides trade blame for the heaviest clashes since July's ceasefire, as Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar warns of a violence could unravel regional stability. Ukraine's President Zelensky arrives in Downing Street for talks with UK Prime Minister Starmer, France's Macron and Germany's Merz on a new US-Ukraine peace proposal. Trump claims Kiev's negotiators love the plan but says Zelensky hasn't read it yet, as the Ukrainian leader insists key issues require face-to-face discussion. EU countries back a major tightening of migration rules, including plans for return hubs for failed asylum seekers outside the bloc. Interior ministers in Brussels approve the Commission's proposals amid rising public pressure, with the package now headed to the European Parliament. Sudan's rapid support forces say they have captured the Heglig oil region on the southern border, calling it a pivotal gain in their war with the army. A military source confirms troops withdraw to avoid damage to oil facilities as the power struggle intensifies. Syrians celebrate the first anniversary of Bashar al-Assad's overthrow with events in Damascus Umayyad Square and military parades nationwide, even as the country struggles to recover from years of war. Celebrations come amid ongoing instability and a fractured landscape 1 year after Assad fled to Russia. President Trump's new global security roadmap permits any target of denuclearizing North Korea, breaking with 2 decades of US policy. The shift sparks speculation that Washington is positioning for a diplomatic breakthrough with Pyongyang in 2026. The US, Israel and Qatar hold a trilateral meeting in New York, hosted by White House envoy Steve Witkoff, with Mossad chief David Barnea and a senior Qatari official present. Washington confirms the talks months after an Israeli airstrike in Doha targeted Hamas leadership, but releases no details. Iran says a European dual national arrested during the 12-day war with Israel has been sent to trial on charges of espionage for the Zionist regime. Officials have not named the defendant but allege he conducted intelligence cooperation with Israel. Okay, we start this hour in Europe, and Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul is urging China to use its influence to help end Russia's war in Ukraine. Wadephul made these comments during his first official visit to Beijing, where he emphasized that China, as a major Russian trading partner, has significant sway over Moscow. He called on Beijing to take concrete steps to promote peace and de-escalation, despite China maintaining a neutral stance and refraining from condemning Russia's invasion. Wadephul's visit marks a key diplomatic effort by Germany to involve China in negotiations, highlighting Europe's push for a broader international support to bring an end to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Joining us now is Andrew Latham. He is an international affairs expert and he joins us live from Minneapolis in the United States. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us here on the programme. Of course, Andrew, 2025 has been a year of conflict. Russia and Ukraine, of course, dragging into its 4th year, approaching its 4th year. But of course, the world's second largest economy and powerhouse China hasn't been involved in brokering these peace deals, of course, like Donald Trump's United States. Of course, now Germany pushing for China to be involved in those negotiations. What more can you tell us about China's strategy when it comes to making peace in these conflicts?
Well, China, above all, is looking to position itself on the global stage as a leader of the global South, first of all. B, a budding or emerging leader of the international order more broadly. And so those are the big pictures, and that inclines them to want to play the role of, when they can, peacemaker, a broker of various kinds of deals. But there are some cross currents as well at play here. Beijing is not going to throw Moscow, one of its major partners, under the bus. It simply isn't. And so it has maintained a position of, I wouldn't say strict neutrality. Behind the curtains, of course, it's been transferring a lot of dual-use technology to Russia, but it certainly hasn't condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Again, that Russian invasion of Ukraine is perceived very differently in the global south. It is not viewed as an epochal, world-changing event. It's just another European war as far as many countries in the global south are concerned. And so China has not invested too much of its diplomatic or geopolitical capital in appearing to try to bring that war to an end. So striking a balance between advancing its agenda as emerging leader of the global south in the international community, but also not wanting to abandon its ally, Russia.
Yes, Andrew. China insists that it is neutral in this war, but of course refuses to condemn Russia's invasion. But how neutral is Beijing in practice?
On the diplomatic stage, it is rather neutral. It's striking a tone. Neutral means we're not in favor of one side or the other, and they've struck that tone. In practice, though, they have clearly been playing the role of supportive ally. They haven't supplied much in the way of kinetic or lethal aid, but a lot of dual-use technology is being provided. And of course, China is a major market for Russian oil and gas, but also other commodities like potash, fertilizer, for example, which is sustaining the Russian war effort. So it's providing every kind of assistance imaginable other than providing lethal military aid and coming out squarely in favor of Russia's attack on Ukraine in international circles, on the international diplomatic stage. So again, trying to strike that balance, but in practical terms, I don't think Russia could continue to prosecute this war without China's under the table, as it were, support.
Okay, Andrew, do stay with us as we turn to our next story. The European Union nations have agreed on a major tightening of migration rules, backing proposals that would allow return hubs for rejected asylum seekers to be set up outside the 27-country bloc. Interior ministers approved the plan during talks in Brussels, responding to growing public pressure across Europe to curb irregular migration. The measures proposed by the European Commission aim to speed up returns and improve enforcement of asylum decisions. However, they still require approval from the European Parliament before becoming law. Migration remains a defining issue for Europe. By 2020, the continent hosted around 87 million international migrants, including around 40 million from outside Europe and millions moving within EU states. In 2023 alone, more than 4.3 million non-EU immigrants entered the bloc. Migration flows are driven by economic opportunity, conflict, climate pressures and long-standing historical ties. Colonial history still shapes migration to Europe. Many migrants come from Africa and Asia, where European rule imposed borders, extracted resources and reshaped politics, creating inequalities and conflict. Shared language, education and family ties also draw migrants to the continent. Andrew, EU interior ministers have agreed to allow these what they call return hubs for rejected asylum seekers outside the 27-country bloc. How significant is this shift in EU migration policy?
Well, it signals a response to what many European citizens consider to be a growing problem, which is the movement of peoples of non-European heritage into the European Union. So on the one hand, we have that dynamic at play. On the other hand, it's a response to, and this is related to, internal pressures generated by what is often referred to as the far right or the right wing in in European politics. So it's both a rational response in a sense to an objective challenge, but it's also a political response to a political challenge. And sorry, neighbor's dog. It is legally, it's important that these hubs be established outside European Union territory because that strips the migrants of claims to certain kinds of political status within Europe.
Yes, and Andrew, setting up these return hubs outside the European Union raises immediate red flags. Does this violate the European Union's human rights obligations, or can the bloc justify it, or will have to jump through numerous loopholes?
I think the latter. It's going to have to jump through numerous legal loopholes. One of the reasons why these hubs would be set up outside of the European Union is because it's in a legal gray zone, as it were, or at least it's in a zone in which advocates for restricting migration can claim that these are perfectly legal under international and law and norms, etc. But there'll be pushback as well. There'll be those who claim that this is a violation of international humanitarian law and the rights of people to move and etc. So it has to be seen as a move on a chessboard, as it were. And on one side, there are those in favor of current rates of migration into Europe from outside Europe. And on the other hand, there are those administrative, political, social forces that are pushing back and saying, no, enough is enough, and we need to find a way to curtail these migration dynamics. And this, I think this is one move. It's not definitive one way or the other, whether it's defeated or it goes ahead, but it is a move on that particular chessboard.
Yes, Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it is a pleasure to talk to you here on the programme. Okay, we move on now, and the United Nations has sharply criticised what it calls growing global apathy toward human suffering as it launched its 2026 humanitarian aid appeal in Geneva. UN humanitarian chief Tom Fletcher says the world is witnessing rising brutality, impunity and disregard for international law, with conflicts showing horrific levels of violence. Facing major funding cuts, the UN has presented a streamlined plan seeking at least $23 billion to support 87 million people in crisis zones, including Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, Haiti and Myanmar. The full target is $33 billion to reach 135 million people, but the UN warns the goal may be difficult to meet due to restrictions in foreign aid, including cuts by the United States. The UN estimates that 240 million people affected by war, disease, disasters and climate impacts urgently need assistance. Let's listen in.
This is a time of brutality, impunity and indifference. This is a time when the rules are in retreat, when the scaffolding of coexistence is under sustained attack, when our survival antennae have been numbed by distraction and corroded by apathy, when we are putting more energy and money into finding new ways to kill each other while dismantling the hard-won ways we've developed to protect ourselves from our worst instincts. When politicians boast of cutting aid.
We're now joined by Saul Sadka. He is a political commentator and he joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much, Saul, for joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you on the programme. The UN says the world is showing a growing apathy towards human suffering. What are your thoughts on Tom Fletcher's statement there?
The UN, I would say, no one is more responsible for the growing apathy in the world towards human suffering all over the place than the United Nations. The United Nations has been hijacked by groups that are fundamentally hostile to the West and to Western values. And they use the empathy of people in the West against them. So, for example, there is no particular interest in the world at the moment about the absolute pure genocide that's ongoing in the Sudan, where tens of thousands of people have been killed in the last weeks alone, in absolute bloodbaths, to the extent that you can see piles of bodies from space. No one is interested in that. And the reason is that they have been trained over the past decade, and particularly over the past 2 years, to be entirely focused on one particular contract, on one particular conflict. And that conflict, of course, is the one between Israel and Gaza that was instigated by Hamas 2 years ago. That is the UN's pet project.
So he did, Tom Fletcher there, the humanitarian chief, he did mention Sudan, he did mention Haiti, he did mention Gaza, of course. He said 240 million people worldwide need urgent assistance. Does Israel believe the UN is overstating needs here then?
Absolutely not. First of all, I don't speak for Israel. Of course, you mentioned those conflicts, but nevertheless, because the UN has focused obsessively on this one conflict over the past 2 years, I no doubt there is a sudden fatigue in the minds of the donor countries as to what's going on, because they've seen what happened with all the money they gave to the UN, and particularly the UN Relief and Works Agency that has been responsible for the Palestinian quote-unquote refugee problem for the past 78 years. And they've seen that their money has not only gone for nothing, but has been spent to back and support and provide cover for actual terrorists. And nothing can shock the donor nations more than that. So if that's how the UN is spending their money, then it's going to be very difficult in the future for them to come and cap in hand and ask them to give money for other conflicts. Although, of course, absolutely, the conflicts elsewhere in the world, as well as the situation for the Palestinians in Gaza, have to be resolved. They have to get the food they need, they have to be cared for, and these conflicts absolutely have to be ended, there's no question. Right now, the overriding concern of the world should be none other than the conflict in Sudan, where it could be that thousands of people are being killed daily in pure massacres, and nothing is being done, nothing. There's no one to help them.
Okay.
It's a complete tragedy.
Saul, do stay with us as we have further news coming our viewers' way. Now, Israeli police have stormed the sealed UNRWA headquarters in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem. Security guards were detained and phones confiscated while the surrounding area was closed and the building searched. The raid follows Israel's ban on UNRWA operations in Jerusalem, after which the Palestinian Authority called for urgent international action. The UN General Assembly recently renewed UNRWA's mandate for 3 years with 151 votes in favour. The agency, which assists Palestinian refugees displaced since 1948, faces severe financial challenges after Israel accused staff of involvement in the October 7th attacks. Key donor nations, including the United States, suspended or paused funding following the allegations. UNRWA has received no evidence from Israel to support the claims. No immediate comment has come from Israeli police or UNRWA, on the other hand, the Palestinian Authority condemned the raid as a violation of international law and urged accountability for Israel's actions. Saul once again joins us. Can I get your opinion or perspective on that? Of course, Israel has not yet released a statement about these claims of this UNRWA headquarters in East Jerusalem being raided. What are your thoughts, Saul?
First of all, it's completely false that UNRWA and the United Nations have not been provided with evidence as to the complicity of its members and the organization itself as a collective in the October 7th attacks, and indeed in the radicalization of an entire generation of Palestinian children. A majority of the people that crossed the border 2 years ago and committed those massacres were trained, educated in UNRWA schools from a young age. That's primarily what UNRWA's job has become. The majority of its staff are actually teachers in the school system, and those teachers in the school system collectively educated a generation of Arabs in Gaza to want to murder Jews. As a result of that education system, majority run by UNRWA, we got what we had 2 years ago, and we have what we have today. And the suffering of the Palestinian people will continue as long as that education system is in place. So absolutely, it's critical that not only is UNRWA dismantled in its headquarters in Jerusalem, that has been done today, but UNRWA as an organization itself completely has to go. Every single arm of UNRWA has to go. In Korea, after the Korean War, 70 years ago, there was a UN Korea version of UNRWA, that managed to resettle or rehouse and deal with the Korean refugee problem that occurred at the time within 2 years, and that was the end of that organization, and no longer exists. And that's what should have happened to UNRWA as well. There's no reason why, when there are almost no people alive who are actual refugees from a war in 1948.
It's extremely muddy, Sol, when it comes to this. Of course, there is critics who say that there is no publicly accepted Israeli evidence that supports claims undermining UNRWA's core refugee registration or validates that the refugees are fake.
I didn't say they're fake. I didn't say they're fake refugees. Absolutely not. No. On the contrary, in 1948, there was a war between Israel and its Arab neighbors, the entire Arab world largely. As a result of that war, approximately 700,000 Arabs who had previously lived under the British mandate became refugees, and approximately 1 million Jews from Arab lands over the subsequent year or two had to flee those Arab lands. And that's what happened in India and Pakistan, as you people well know. Approximately a refugee problem, approximately 20 times the size of that happened. It's what happened in Europe after World War II. That was a period when, in general, that's what happened after wars. However, it turned out to be useful for certain international actors, including the USSR, to turn the refugees in the Middle East into a particular weapon. And they and their children and their grandchildren, and now even their great-great-grandchildren who are currently being born, are suffering because they are being used as weapons in geopolitical tools to harm Israel and to harm the West. And they are the losers here. It's tragic and it's totally unfair. And UNRWA are the people that are purveying that injustice. UNRWA needs to go. UNRWA needs to be shut down post-haste. It should have been done years ago. It should have been done 70 years ago. And when that happens, there is a possibility that Jews and Arabs will be able to live peaceably in this land together without any further incitement to terrorism. When both sides will accept that the other side has roots here and are willing to live alongside each other, that's where the future lies. One can only hope that's what happens. That cannot happen while UNRWA continues to educate the children.
Okay, Saul Saka, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Thank you very much for your time. We now move on, and according to Japan's ambassador to Hanoi, Hayakoti Ito, Japan has pulled out of plans to build Vietnam's Ninh Thuan 2 nuclear power plant, citing an overly tight timeline. The decision complicates Vietnam's long-term strategy to prevent future power shortages. Vietnam faces rising electricity demands driven by rapid industrial growth, expanding manufacturing by firms like Samsung and Apple, and a growing middle class. Extreme weather events such as droughts and typhoons have further strained supplies, leading to major blackouts in recent years. The Ninh Thuan 2 project, planned with a capacity of up to 3.2 gigawatts, was scheduled to come online by 2035, alongside the Russian-backed Ninh Thuan 1 plant. Both projects were originally launched in the early 2010s, but suspended in 2016 over safety and cost concerns. After Vietnam revived its nuclear program last year, Japan and Russia were invited back. However, Japan decided in November that meeting the deadline was unrealistic, partly due to domestic constraints following the Fukushima disaster. Despite the setback, Japan says it may consider future cooperation, including small modular reactors, as Vietnam explores alternative partners from Europe, South Korea, and the United States. A Beijing court has ordered Malaysia Airlines to pay compensation to families of 8 passengers from flight MH370. This comes more than a decade after the plane disappeared. 47 other lawsuits had been withdrawn after the families settled outside of court with Malaysia Airlines and its international arm, Malaysia Airlines International. The court has said that the compensation was to cover funeral expenses, emotional distress and other losses, with each family to receive over $410,000. The Boeing 777, carrying 239 people, vanished from radar screens on March the 8th of 2014, while en route from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. Of the original 78 cases brought by families following the plane crash, the court in Beijing said that 23 were still pending. The 8 passengers whose families were granted compensation by the court have been declared legally deceased. That's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.